All right, welcome back, guys. I'm here today to give you some more completing the square examples. The ones we're going to do today, I'm going to warn you, are going to be probably the most difficult completing the square problems, just because they end up kind of messy. But we're going to follow the same steps that we've been following. And if you follow them step by step, you should be in pretty good shape. All right, so step one says to divide by A. In this case, our A, what's in front of our x squared right here, is just a 1. So we don't need to do step 1 in this particular example. We may need to in future examples, but for this case, we don't need to here. Step 2 says to isolate our constant. So we're going to move our 12 over to the other side. There happens to be a -2 already over there. Not a big deal. So this is going to be x squared plus 9x. I'm going to leave that space like I normally do. And when I subtract 12 on both sides, sorry, that came out a little messy, but I'm going to get -14. Now, step 3 says to take 1/2 of b squared and add it to both sides. Now, this is where things get a little bit messy, because if I take half of 9, that leaves me with 4.5. And if I square 4.5, you're probably going to want to use your calculator here, you're going to get 20.25. So a little bit messy, 20.25. And I'm going to add that over here. I'm going to kind of run out of room, so write it underneath like this. So it looks like this. Now, to be completely honest with you guys, at this point, if you have a choice as to whether to use completing the square or quadratic formula, I would probably use quadratic formula just to avoid this messiness. But completing the square will work in these examples as well. So we're going to keep moving on here, and now we're going to factor our left side, which, remember, when we factor, it's always going to be x and then what half of our b was. So half of 9 was 4.5, so it's x plus 4.5 squared. And over here, I have -14 plus 20.25, which will be 6.25. All right, so now I'm going to try and solve it, which means I'm going to take the square root of both sides. On this side, I'll be left with x plus 4.5 is equal to, and so I'm going to take the square root of 6.25, which comes out to be, we should put our plus or minus here, 2.5. And then I'm going to subtract my 4.5 on both sides. So I'm going to get x equals -4.5 plus or minus 2.5. A little bit messy with the decimals, but in the end, we're going to come out with a pretty good answer here. This one is going to be x equals -4.5 plus 2.5, which will end up being -2. And if I do -4.5 minus 2.5, I'm going to get -7. So I'm going to get two answers here, -2 and -7. All right, let's do one more quick example here. Also a little bit on the messy side, but we can do it. So let me just erase this, get that out of the way. All right, and this one we'll do 4x squared plus 6x minus 20 is equal to 8. All right, so we go back to my steps here. I'm going to keep following my steps. Step 1 says to divide by A. In this case, I do have an A. My A here is 4. So I want to divide each of these pieces by 4. Now you're probably going to realize right away that this one ends up being a little bit messier than we were probably looking to be, but we can still do these types of problems. Again, if you have a choice, you might choose against it, but we can work with this. This will be x squared plus 6 divided by 4. Okay, so that would be 3/2 or 1.5x. Not ideal to have a decimal there, but again, we can work with it. Minus 5, and then 8 divided by 4 is 2. All right, step 2 says to isolate our constant. So I'll do that. This will be x squared plus 1.5x is equal to 7. Now I have to take 1/2 of my b squared and add it to both sides. So I'm going to be taking 1/2 of 1.5. So half of 1.5 is going to be 0.75. And if I square it, I'm going to get 0.5625. Not exactly the nicest number. All right, now we're going to factor the left side. So I know that's going to be x plus half of that 1.5x, so 0.75 squared. And over here, I'm going to have 7.5625. All right, so now I'm going to try and solve. I'm going to take my square root of both sides. So I have x plus 0.75 equals my square root of 7.5625, which is going to be 2 plus or minus 2.75. Get rid of these marks down here. Now I'm going to subtract my 0.75 on both sides. So x equals negative 0.75 plus or minus 2.75. And I'm going to end up with two different answers, negative 0.75 plus 2.75. I'll write them over here. I'm going to get x equals, if I add 2.75, I'm going to get a positive 2. And if I subtract 2.75, I'm going to get negative 3.5. All right, so again, these problems today were a little bit messy, where they don't come out to be perfect whole numbers when we divide by a or when we're taking half of our b squared. But even with decimals, we can still get these answers. All right, hopefully this is making some sense to you guys. Let me know if you have any questions.